What's up, fantasy community? I'm Steve. Today we're going to go over something that maybe has been brought up in your fantasy leagues. I know it's been certainly been brought up in mine. I've been seeing it discussed more and more on various fantasy networks and channels and things like that. So today we're going to go over whether or not we should change or keep the tight end position in fantasy football. So now, of course, I'm not sitting here trying to take away the importance of a tight end to an NFL football team, but we're looking at this from a pure fantasy football perspective, because in fantasy football, there's only one thing we care about, and that's the points. So I feel the tight end position has been heading in this direction for a long time now. It's been absolutely atrocious this year. This could potentially be the worst statistical season for tight ends. I haven't looked into that or read into that. I'm just hearing it from multiple analysts. I'll go out on a whim and believe them until I research it. So now I'm certainly not saying you have to go ahead and make this change. I'm just looking at this in the perspective of how can I maximize my scoring every week. That's how I'm looking at this. So with that said, let's hit the nail on the head here. Unless you have Mark Andrews or you have Travis Kelce, I feel like we're all sick of this revolving door of, oh, we see this tight end with a great matchup. We pick him up, we start him. He drops less than 5. You drop him. You grab another guy with a great streaming matchup. You start him. He drops less than 5. You drop him, and on the vicious cycle goes. So for this comparison, before I get into it, we're going to be grouping 5 running backs and 5 wide receivers and 5 tight ends, and we're going to average out all their stats, and we're going to get a total average for their stats. That's how we're going to do this comparison. So we're going to compare the 5 running backs and the 5 wide receivers with similar rankings and their respective skill position groups. Obviously, there's more wide receivers and running backs than there is tight ends, but we're mostly comparing the situations for these players. So for these comparisons, we're going to look at any stat that makes a player viable and makes you want to start him in your lineup. So we're going to be looking at the targets, the snap counts, the opportunities, the yards per route run, any stat that warrants you wanting to start this player or players. So we're going to compare 5 streaming ranked tight ends, no particular order. This is going to be for week 9, as I mentioned, and their upside compared to, say, another running back or a receiver who maybe isn't so highly ranked in that skill position group. We could go by tiers, but I feel this still is a very fair way to give this comparison. These players are in no particular order. We're just looking at 5 streaming options from week 9 and just comparing all their stats and their opportunities. So obviously, if you have Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce, life is good, right? The sun is shining. Maybe with Mark Andrews, it's a little cloudy right now, but I feel Baltimore took that longevity approach with him, have him fresh for the second half of the season. That's a very smart approach when you had the bye there too. So I wish more teams would do that, So getting into this, the tight ends I have picked Tyler Higbee, Cole Kmet, Mike Gesicki, Evan Ingram, and Hayden Hurst. The running backs I have picked are Donta Foreman, Jeff Wilson Jr., Khalil Herbert, Antonio Gibson, and A.J. Dillon. And the wide receivers I have picked are Caleb Raymond, Mecole Hardman, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, DeAndre Carter, and Darnell Mooney. So again, I mentioned I have all their individual stat data. I will post that in the comments if you want to see it, just to get a better comparison, because again, we're doing this as a group. So going through all this individual stat data, I do feel there is an argument, or at least a discussion that can be made about the tight end position on whether or not it should be kept or changed completely. So I think now we're going to group all these stats together and we're going to go over them and go over the comparisons. So let's obviously start with the big 3 stats, the grease in the engine, right? Catches, yards, touchdowns. For tight ends combined, this is a very poor stat line. 12 catches, 87 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. So obviously not what we're looking for from the tight end position. I feel that stat line alone should be a fair eye-opener, not to into tight ends more. This stat line is obviously very poor. We have Tyler Higbee with the big donut. How many targets did he have in the first 4 weeks? And the man comes out here and drops 0. We have 1 catch from Evan Ingram. We have 1 catch from Mike Gesicki. You can make the argument for Hayden Hurst with the fact that there is no Jamar Chase, but I don't think that argument is valid enough when it comes to the upside and scoring the most points possible on a week-to-week basis. Only Cole Kmet here to come up with a touchdown, but not only 1, 2 touchdowns, and the only tight end to score out of these tight ends. So the usage, this is not the usage we're looking for, and honestly, this stat line is just a very good 1-player stat line. But unfortunately, this is 5 players combined. So it is very poor. So getting to the running backs here, naturally they have more opportunities to touch the ball since they don't need to block as much. Let's look at their numbers grouped. With the 5 I've chosen, they had 45 total carries, 9 total catches, total opportunities was 58, rushing yards were 167, total receiving yards was 40. Unfortunately, there was no rushing TDs, but we did see the Jeff Wilson receiving TD, which is encouraging. Now, with saying all that, I think we can all agree that the opportunity upside comparing tight ends to comparing tight ends to these running backs, it's just not really comparable. The tight end position simply just doesn't touch the ball enough. In some cases, these tight ends I've listed are, these are people's every week starter. That's just how bad the landscape of tight ends is, and these running backs I've chosen, they're no higher ranked than top 30 or rank 30. These are all top 30, top 40 in that range backs, RB3s, RB4s, flex worthy. We're not talking about Christian McCaffrey, we're not talking about all these sought after players, So even these lower ranked backs, we could see the opportunity is just so much more in the grand scheme of things compared to tight ends. In the numbers, again, I still feel like they speak for themselves. Wide receivers, same thing, just like the running backs. They touch the ball significantly more. And obviously, right, they're your primary playmakers, these wide receivers and these running backs, So looking at these receiver numbers this week for the group I've chosen, 22 catches, 290 receiving yards, 2 TDs. Now, these stats don't exactly jump off the page when you see them, but when I get into the more analytical data, you'll see where the upside is for these guys. So now that we've gone over all their individual stats, we're going to dive into the underlying numbers, the stats that you don't really see, but they make a very big impact on how good or bad a player is going to be. So for tight ends, of course, we got to start with them. They had an average of 11.3 target share with 16 total targets between them, which of course is terrible. We mentioned it earlier. We have Tyler Higbee with 0. We have Evan Ingram with only 1 catch. We got Mike Gesicki with only 1 catch. We got Cole Kmet with a decent stat line with the 5 catches and the 2 touchdowns. But again, he is the only one to have a touchdown out of these guys. And with saying that, he had the 2 touchdowns. So if he doesn't catch those TDs, what does his stat line look like? Maybe he has 1 of them. But again, what does he have if he doesn't have a touchdown? He has 5 catches for whatever the yards might be. So getting back to the tight end stats again, as a group, they only ran 109 total routes for an average of 21.8. This is significant when we compare this to the snaps they played. Total snaps was 217 snaps between them for an average of 43.4 snaps each. 21 routes run with an average of 43 snaps played for these guys. The usage as a pass-catching weapon simply just isn't there. With the league becoming a more pass-dominant league, these tight ends are going to be asked more and more and more to block, and that's just natural. If it's going to be a more passing league, they're going to be asked to block more. That's what their job is going to be, So as a group, they only ran a route on 66.2% of dropbacks. This stat really stands out for me because for somebody trying to find a tight end, I feel like we base our streaming options off these big body tight ends who might get red zone looks. But unfortunately for this bunch, they only had 3 red zone looks total. Cole Kmet had 2 of them. When we mostly base our tight end streamer, again, off of if a tight end is going to get looks in the end zone or in the red zone as a whole, for me, that kind of boomer bust style, that just isn't worth it for me when I want to maximize the amount of points I can get on a week-to-week basis. So let's jump to the running back group now. Of course, this group with the best chance of getting fantasy points, they get the rushes, they get the catches, they get opportunity to touch the ball. So just looking at these numbers combined with their averages, a few numbers are kind of low. Again, we're not saying to take tight ends out. That's not what this video is about. This is a pure perspective video. We're looking at our best chance at winning, our best chance at maximizing the amount of points we can get every week. So with these running backs, the target share for these 5 combined running backs, nothing to write home about. 13 targets, 9 catches. Of course, we're looking for better than that. But overall, if you're in a pinch, bye week, injury, whatever it might be, these guys will make do for maybe a week or 2 or just something to get you through. I would still take a shot on any one of these guys before any streaming tight end option. I would happily start one of these guys. So getting into the carries, we have 45 carries combined for an average of 9. Total rushing yards was 167, or an average of 33.4 each. No rushing TDs, unfortunately. Only the one receiving TD between them. 40 receiving yards. 58 total opportunities between them, which we want to see more, but it isn't terrible. I'm sure none of you are convinced to start any of these guys based off these numbers so far. But when we look at pure situation between the two position groups, the numbers aren't flashy, but diving into the analytical data, the analytical stats, the stuff you don't see, the upside is most certainly there. So we still got receivers to go, so there's plenty of time to get you convinced on this. So there was 162 total snaps played between all these running backs for an average of 32.4 snaps each, which is roughly about half the game. Now, of course, we want to see the players on the field the whole time because, but if the touches are there, the opportunity's there, the usage is there. Do we care how much they're on the field? Of course we do. But if they're getting us points, we can maybe let the usage slide, maybe a little bit, that on-field usage. So you can maybe make the argument that tight ends are on the field more, which is fair. But how often are they blocking? That's the thing. They might be on the field. That's fine. That's great. But if they're blocking more than they're running routes, then we're not doing too good there. These backs ran a total of 83 routes each, which is an average of 16.6. They ran a route on 35% of the dropbacks, which you want to see that number increase. But again, if you're getting the usage, you're getting the targets, you're getting the usage. We don't care how much they're on the field. If they're touching the ball in their minimal amount of field time, hey, I'm all for it. Last but certainly not least, let's go over these wide receivers. So with the wide receivers, their upside is more or less capped just because they don't rush the ball as much as, say, a running back catches the ball, if that makes sense. So we want the best possible upside. Of course, we just keep saying we're driving that point, really driving that point home. I keep saying it. That's what this whole thing is about. Again, with these receivers, most of them are ranked outside the top 30 compared to these tight ends being ranked in the top 15. So again, this just gives us a perspective of the usage and the stats that these players are getting when they're on the field. So this week, they all combined, the wide receivers, they all combined for a total snap count of 305, which averages to 61 each, which that's perfect. I mean, if you're on the field for 61 snaps, you're either in overtime or you're in a back and forth battle. You're playing a lot, So we can clearly see that these players are on the field and they're staying on the field, which is exactly what we want to see. Combined, these 5 wide receivers ran a total of 200 routes, which equals to about 40 each, which means they ran a route on 81.8% of dropbacks, which obviously that's very good. We maybe want to see it up a little, maybe that 85%, 90%, but I'm not going to complain if they're running a route on over 80% of dropbacks. That's a very good chance of getting targets. As a group, they combined for 22 catches on 28 total targets, an average of 4.4 catches each for a 14.8 target share, 209 receiving yards as a group, which averages 40.8 each, and 2 TDs with a total of 6 red zone looks for the bunch. That stat doesn't look great, but again, these are the 3rd and 4th ranked options. In some situations over in Los Angeles, the Chargers, their 3rd and 4th ranked options are now the 1st and 2nd because of injury. But again, you're taking advantage of upside and usage and opportunity. That's what this video is about. Because again, we want to maximize the amount of points we can get every week, right? So, these players, they might be the number one due to injury again, like I said, but still, fantasy football is about taking advantage of those opportunities and being quick to act. And so for me, in a pinch, like a bye week or whatever it might be, I am more than happy starting one of these guys, one of these wide receivers or these running backs over these tight ends. So overall, I still feel that potentially turning the tight end spot into either a running back spot or a wide receiver spot or a flex spot just gives you that higher upside in scoring points every week. Now, of course, tight ends are going to have big weeks here and there, but they're just going to be impossible to predict, even in a good matchup. So now comparing these stats now, I think the big one that stands out for everybody is the total opportunities. Tight ends are capped at how much they touch the ball. Running backs, they had the 58 total opportunities with wide receivers having 28 total opportunities. I don't know if any of those receivers have a rushing attempt, but again, 28 opportunities ain't too bad. The tight ends with only 16. Now, I'm no expert in math, but just based off that number alone, that should make you hesitant to ever want to start a tight end, let alone flex one. Comparing target shares from running backs to tight ends, we can see that the tight ends have the bigger share, but even with that bigger share, we only see 3 more catches than the running back group. And one of those catches from that running back group went for a touchdown. So if you're getting 3 less catches, okay, fine. What's a catch worth? Half PPR, 1.5, full PPR, 1, 2, 3. Oh, that catch for a touchdown went for 6. So there you go. That's all that canceled out. So with Cole Kmet, he was the only tight end out of that group to have a TD. He had 2 TDs. Comparing the tight ends to running backs, the tight ends have a bigger route participation than running backs. Mostly because running backs are rushing more, obviously, but that could be anything. Because, of course, the target share for running backs in most situations is more favorable for the running back, depending, of course, on the scheme and the offense. So overall, I feel I have made an argument from a pure being on the field point for tight ends, at least, to keep them. But with the upside capped and their opportunity share just significantly lower than, say, a running back or a wide receiver, I still take a shot on any one of these backs over a tight end. It's just really not comparable. Comparing wide receivers to these tight ends, their stats are in similar categories, of course, and the wide receiver numbers are just obviously so much more promising because they're a primary playmaker. Bigger route participation, more targets, more catches, literally more everything than a tight end. And again, we want the best possible upside to maximize our points. You guys are going to hate me for saying it over and over again. I'm like a broken record player. But the stats speak for themselves. And for me personally, I would have no problem at least changing the tight end to a flex. I don't want the tight end gone completely, but I feel switching it to at least a flex for now until we see more production out of tight ends. I think that is a fair move to make. So what do you guys think? Do you think I have made a fair argument? I would love to hear what you guys think of this. If I've missed anything or any stats are wrong, I would love for you guys to let me know that as well. And I just appreciate you guys watching me, and I hope, maybe I gave you some perspective with this,